welcome. Thank you for being here. It's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Yuri Leskevich. He's finishing up his PhD in the machine learning department at Carnegie Mellon. He's been doing a lot of great work in data mining, social networks, and more generally in what has come to be known as network science, and winning a lot of awards and publishing lots of papers in the process. And he's going to talk to us about dynamics of networks.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming. So I'll talk about today is dynamics of networks. But let me start somewhere else. So if you go and think, what do we have today? I would argue that today we have like large online systems that have detailed records of human activity. So there are many examples of such online systems. For example, on the web, especially we have like online communities like Facebook or MySpace that have like tens or hundreds of millions of users, and that they are multi-billion-dollar businesses. What we also have is like detailed communication records like Instant Messenger, where again there is a big number or a large number of users of such technologies. We also have like news and social media. What I mean by that is like blogs, that there is an estimate that there are 250 million blogs worldwide, and like presidential candidates run blogs for elections and things like that. And what we also have is like online worlds like World of Warcraft or Second Life that are becoming immensely popular. So note here that we have two things. First, all this is going on computers, or these are all like computing applications. So we as computer scientists are interested in this. On the other hand, we have detailed traces about human social activity. So this gives us great opportunity for impact both in science and sort of applications or industry. So what I'll talk about today is about networks as data. So basically what I showed on the previous slide all naturally represents itself as networks. And here I have a few examples of networks. So for example, World Wide Web as web pages and hyperlinks between them can be seen as a network or as a graph, right? Internet, autonomous systems is naturally a network. Social networks, again, are networks, right? We have people are nodes and we have edges connecting nodes that have some kind of interaction between them. Then again, communication would mean, again, we have people and then there is an edge if two people communicated or exchanged a message. Citation networks are another example of networks where we have scientific or academic papers linking or referring to each other. And there are also like biological, like protein interaction or gene interaction networks. So this is the type of data that I'll be talking about today. And if you go and ask, what do we know about these networks? I would say we know a lot about their structure. So what I mean by that is, for example, we know that they are scale-free. We know what 6 degrees of separation means. We know like things like small world, bipartite cores, and so on. We also have a lot of models to reason or to build intuitions about these properties we find across large networks. So, for example, you probably heard of models like preferential attachment, small world, copying model. We have latent space models, exponential random graphs, and things like that. Right? So this is all mostly for the static networks. So what we know much less about are processes and dynamics of networks. And this is exactly what my talk will be about today. So I'll talk about dynamics of networks, and I'll talk about two different aspects of dynamics of networks. So first aspect is network evolution, where basically the question is, how does the network structure change as the network grows and evolves? Okay, that's the first question we'll talk about. And the second one is about diffusion and cascading behavior in networks, where the question is, how do rumors, diseases spread over the networks? And one theme that will also be coming up is basically is scale of the data. So I like looking at large scale data. And one reason for this is that we need massive network data for patterns to start emerging. And for some of the data sets I'll talk in the rest of the talk, for example, I'll be showing results on Microsoft Instant Messenger data set, which is basically the largest social network we ever or anyone has ever looked at, where we basically have 240 million people. So all the users of Messenger that generated 255 billion conversations in a 1 month of observation period we had. And that was like terabytes of compressed data. Similarly, I'll show something on product recommendations where we had like a sample of 4 million people and 16 million explicit product recommendations between these people. and what is going on there. And then I'll also show you some work on the blogosphere, where again, we have tens of millions of posts and hundreds of millions of hyperlinks between them. Okay, so that's for the data part. For the structure of the talk, or for the remainder of the talk, this is how it is structured, right? I'll show you two general stories. You can't really see my pointer. So I'll talk about diffusion and cascading behavior, and then I'll talk about the evolution of networks. And sort of both two teams will break it into two parts. In the first part, I'll tell you about patterns and observations, basically empirical measurements done on real data to answer the following two questions. One is how do things propagate in networks? The other will be how does the network structure changes over time? And then there will be like a modeling or an algorithmic part where we'll try to use findings from the top boxes to design better algorithms, to design better models, feed them to the data, and so on. So basically, for the rest of the talk, we'll go and fill in these 4 boxes or answer these questions that are written here. So first, about diffusion and cascading behavior. So intuitively, what you should be thinking about is basically about behaviors that cascade from node to node like an epidemic. And there are many such examples in the world. Like, for example, news, opinions, or rumors propagate through the social networks. Similar for word of mouth, where the idea is that you get to hear, or you tell your friends that you have a new gadget, they go buy it, and they go tell their friends that they got this great new gadget. Similar is true for like infectious diseases like flu, that again gets transmitted through personal contact. And the concept here is basically that as activations spread through the network, they leave a trace, and this trace is called a cascade. So the idea is the following. If I have a network and I have a node that is the first one to get infected, and then this, let's say, infection or propagates through the network, right? Then basically the graph this propagation process creates is called a cascade, right, or a propagation graph. And there are 2 settings for where such propagation naturally occur, and where we had a lot of data about. So first one is for viral marketing. So basically here the idea is that people send and receive product recommendations, and then they can purchase products. So you can think of a large online retailer, of a web store. Basically think of it as Amazon. You go there, you buy a product. When you are checking out, you are asked, do you want to recommend this product to other people? And you type in their email addresses, and these people would get their email saying that you are recommending them this great product, right? So this is the idea. You go, you buy the product, and you send your recommendation. They get an email. Then the person can go and buy the same product, the one you recommended. They get 10% discount, and you get 10% credit. So it's like an incentivized viral marketing scheme. And of course, this person who bought the book you recommended can then go and further recommend, right? And basically, the data that we look at here comes from a large online retailer where we have 4 million people, 60 million recommendations on 500,000 products, okay? So this is the first setting where we observe basically the propagation of information and influence through the network. The second example comes from the blogosphere, where bloggers write posts and they refer to other posts using hyperlinks, right? And because everything is time-stamped, we can follow hyperlinks to detect where was the source of information and how the information propagated, basically. So the idea is the following. If there's a blog that writes the first post, then let's say Slashdot refers to it by putting another post and pointing with a hyperlink to it, and then the information spreads this way, right? By other blogs writing posts and linking to their source, right? And of course, as blogs write these posts, information propagates, right? And what I'll show here is data on like 10 million such posts coming from top 50,000 blogs over 1 year, and there are like 16 million links between these posts. And here we basically can go and trace how information was propagated through the network. So the first basic question that we'll ask is, how do these cascades, these propagation graphs, how do they look like, right? Are they more like stars, which would mean there is something is said and then there is just a burst and nothing else? Are they like long chains? Are they like trees and so on? And actually, if you go and enumerate these graphs, basically if you go and count all cascades that happen in the data, this is what is going on the blogosphere, right? So I'm showing you cascades sorted by the decreasing frequency, and the propagation goes top down. right? So this says that the post is written, then somebody refers to it, and then somebody else refers to this middle post, right? And this is what I'm showing here. Similarly, you can do the same thing for viral marketing data set I just introduced, where, for example, I'm plotting the same thing. I'm showing you top most frequent cascades in the decreasing frequency. This is for DVD recommendations, and here again, the influence flows top down, right? The idea is that there is a person who made the recommendation to two people, and they both made a purchase, for example, in this case. Yeah?
So clearly some of these are subsumed by others. So, so I'm not sure how, does that just mean you count the same things more than once?
No, some can be small, some can be large, right? So of course it's, right, the most frequent cascade I'm not even showing, is the one where nothing happens, right? You write a post and nobody cares about, and that's like 95% of the time that's true, right? And then these are the rest, right? So sure they are, I'm sort of taking the maximal propagation that happened, okay? And now basically what you can ask is, what are the differences? Why do I see these things the way they are? And basically one observation that you can make is that these viral marketing cascades are more social. And what I mean by that is that in viral marketing we get these collisions, basically where two different people recommend to the same person, or two or more different people recommend to the same person. And the other thing is that we get these like nice, richer, non-tree-like structures, while on the blogosphere it's mostly like trees or chain-like structures. So that's the first observation. The second question you can ask is sort of very, very basic one. And the question is, how does the probability of adoption depend on the number of friends who have already adopted? So the question here is, how likely are you to buy a product or buy an iPod given the number of your friends who already own an iPod, right? And you can think that if we are able to answer this question, this will have a big influence on models and algorithms we are using for diffusion and so on. And if you would think about it a bit more, there are two hypotheses that both make sense, or two sort of prototypical curves that both make sense. One is this diminishing returns type of hypothesis, where I'm plotting the number of friends that already own an iPod or already have a product, and here's my probability of adopting, basically going and buying that product, right? And the idea is, as more of my friends have it, the more likely I am to go and buy it, right? But this probability slowly saturates. Okay, that's the first one. And the second one that also makes sense is this critical mass, or some kind of threshold behavior, where the idea is that I don't really care until a critical number of my friends have the product, and then very quickly I transition into the high probability mode. And interestingly enough, to be able to distinguish between these two hypotheses, you need lots of data. And I'll show on the next slide what lots means. So here's the result for the viral marketing domain, right? So I'm showing you the same axis as I had before, number of recommendations you receive and your probability of purchasing, right? And I'm doing this for DVD recommendations where I have 8.2 million data points, 8.2 million observations, and you can see this diminishing returns type of curve. So that's first observation. The other observation that you can make is that these probabilities are remarkably low, right? So people don't really pay so much attention to these recommendations as you may think. Interestingly also, similar findings were also made for example, what's your probability of joining a group given the number of your friends that are already in the group, or what's your probability of sending a message given the number of common friends you have with that person. And both of the times was basically similar finding was found that this human adoption curve follows like a diminishing returns type of property. Yeah, is there a question? No. Just keep this curve in mind because it will come up again in the few slides. So now I showed you the empirical like measurement part, right? I showed you cascade shapes and I showed you the shape of the human adoption curve. And now I want to ask, how do you find influential nodes in the networks, or how do we quickly detect epidemics in networks? So this is for the rest. And here is why you would want to do this. For example, or different settings where this question sort of translates to the same task. So for example, in blogs, or on the web, you could ask about information epidemics. So basically, who are the most influential bloggers, right, that create the biggest cascades of talking when they say something. In viral marketing, you could go and ask, who are the trendsetters? Who are the influential people, right? Who should I give a free gadget so that they go and infect their friends and their friends go buy it, right? Or you can, in the disease spreading case, you can ask, where should I place my monitoring stations to detect these epidemics as quickly as possible as they spread, right? So pictorially, what I mean by that is that if you have a network and there is a first cascade or a node that gets infected, then this infection or information propagates through the network. And then there could be another cascade, C2, that again propagates through the network. And the question is, where do I place my sensor or my monitoring station, or which node do I monitor, so that if there is some propagation going on, it hits my node as quickly as possible and I raise an alarm, right? So that's the task we'll be looking at. And there are two parts of the problem. So first part is the cost, right? Monitoring different nodes has different costs. So the idea is that every node, every position where we can monitor, we have some cost associated with it, and you can think of these costs as just dollars. And there is another, right? There is cost and there is reward. Reward, there are different rewards, but for example, one reward that makes sense in our case is you want to minimize the number of affected people. So what would that mean is that if I have a cascade going on, right, the red thing there, and I decide to monitor these two green nodes, then the reward I'm getting are these blue nodes, are sort of all the people that would get infected, but since I detected the infection, we saved them, okay? So that's one reward, and you can consider other rewards, and basically we can also deal with them. So for example, you could say, I want to minimize the time to detection, which would mean from the introduction of your disease or your propagation till the time you detect, you want to minimize that. Or you could just say, I just want to detect that there was an outbreak, and I don't care how late or how many people got infected. I just want to detect. So we can deal with any of these three reward or objective functions. So more formally, what we are trying to solve is that we are given a graph and we are given some budget, and we are given data on how cascades spread through the network. So basically, for every cascade, we know when it hit a particular node or whether it hit the node or not, right? Because nobody says that all the viruses have to take over the whole network. And okay, given this data, what we want to do is we want to set a subset of nodes, right? To maximize this expected reward, right? So the idea is this is the reward for detecting a particular cascade I, and that's the probability of seeing this cascade. You can think of this just a weight, or you can even forget about it. It doesn't change much. So the idea is select a subset of nodes A to maximize this expected reward, and we want to fit inside this cost. Okay? And solving this exactly is NP-hard. But let me show you what we did, basically. So first, I'll show you the problem structure we exploit. And this comes under the name of submodularity of the reward functions. And you can think of it as some kind of concavity over sets. Okay? Then once I show you that our problem has this structure, then I'll show you our algorithm for which we have an approximation guarantee to solve these types of problems. And then I'll show you how to speed up the algorithm that we are able to run it on large data sets. So going first about submodularity. So to show that our function is submodular, here's the definition, right? It says that if I have two placements or two solutions, where A is a subset of B, then the idea is that gain of adding a particular node to my solution to a smaller solution is higher than adding the same thing to the larger solution, right? So my gain of adding placing a sensor diminishes with the number of sensors I placed. So to make this more precise, here's a very natural example of a submodular function. So consider that we have these sets, and our reward is the size of the union of these sets. Okay? So I'm considering adding this set U to my solution, to my set, right? And now I can ask, what's the marginal reward I'm getting from adding U to the whole thing, right? And this red part is the marginal reward, right? This is how much area more I'm covering, right? And now if you consider another solution B, right, that is a superset of A, and ask, I'm adding the same set u to it. How much do I gain from it now? Right now we gain less from it. Okay, this is like a natural example of a submodular function. Okay, and then the other thing that we'll need to know for our proof is that if I have submodular functions and I combine them, that's still submodular. Okay, so let me now show you why our reward function is submodular. It goes by the same principle. So consider that we have a cascade, and consider that these are cascade I. So R sub I of U sub k is the number of nodes that we save from monitoring a particular node. So the idea is if I monitor this node, this is a set of nodes I'm saving. So now if I monitor more nodes, this would be the set of nodes that I save from monitoring that node U. So by the same argument and basically the same picture from before, my reward is the size of this union of these sets. So that's submodular, as I showed on the previous slide. And then what's my global optimization problem is like a combination, a weighted sum of these submodular functions. So that's still submodular. Okay, so that's the problem structure we'll be exploiting. And then our solution to the problem is that basically we have this so cost-effective lazy forward selection algorithm, where the idea is to run 2 independent runs of a modified greedy algorithm. So to decide where to place which nodes to monitor, and we have some cost assigned to every node, the idea is that we'll first independently generate a solution A prime, where the idea is to just ignore the cost and greedily optimize the reward. And then we'll run another solution where we'll greedily optimize the reward to cost ratio, right? So the idea is to select nodes that give us the most for their price, okay? And idea will be then that we pick best of these 2 solutions, and it turns out since our reward function is submodular, then we can prove that our algorithm is near optimal, meaning we get like factor 3 approximation. Okay, so if we are greedy, this is the worst case of what we'll do. Okay, as it turns out, even this simple greedy approach is too slow for the size of the data we are using. To show you this, consider how greedy approach or how greedy algorithm works. Right, the idea is to repeatedly add node with the highest marginal gain. So if this is my graph, my network, and I consider which nodes to monitor, I consider placing a monitoring node A, and that's the reward I get, right? And then I go and I consider all other nodes to monitor, and I pick the best one, right? And I place my sensor. So now what I do is, again, go reevaluate all other sensors and pick the best one and add it to my solution, right? That's how greedy works. So basically at every step, we evaluate all possible placements that we can add to the current solution and pick the best one. Right, and you can see why this is slow, because in every step we have to go through all the sensors or all the nodes of the network. Okay, that's slow. So here's the idea how to make this faster, and it goes under the name of lazy evaluation. So basically what submodularity guarantees is that marginal rewards decrease with the solution size. So the idea is that if I have my network there and I decide to place sensor, to decide to monitor node D, then this is the reward I'm getting. If for some reason I decide to monitor A and now say, okay, what if now I add D to the whole thing, my reward shrinks, right? And if I'm monitoring A and B already and ask how much do I gain now for adding D, this shrinks even further, right? And the idea is to use this marginal reward from previous time step or previous iteration of the algorithm as the upper bound on the current marginal reward. So to show you how this works, here's the picture, right? Again, we have our network. We go and decide to place. We are still greedy, right? So we pick the best one and we place it. But what we do now, we use these rewards in previous time step as an upper bound. So we sort of sort by them and consider adding nodes in this particular order. So we consider D. We see that it reward shrank so much, so we put it down. Now we consider B, and now we can stop. We can place, or we can decide to monitor B for the following reason, because we know that reward for E will only shrink, and our reward for B is already the real reward, right? So we know that everything else will only shrink, so we can place node B. And this means that we don't really have to go and evaluate all other nodes. So now if you think that we have like tens or thousands of nodes, we only need to sort of evaluate top few nodes and we are done. So and it turns out that this helps a lot to speed up the algorithm, right? So we place B. Okay, so to show you the results, so what I'm asking here is the following. If you say, I have 10 minutes a day to read news, which news sources or which blogs should I read to be most up to date, right? The question is, which blogs do I read so that I detect these information epidemics as effectively as possible? And here I'm showing the number of blogs that you are reading, the number of blogs you select, and here's the reward we are getting. And the red is the hour performance, and then the other curves are like heuristic solutions that you could use. So for example, you could say, I will be using blogs that have the most in-links. Right? This is something that today is state of the art in terms of finding influential blogs, and you see how well you would be doing. You could also say, for example, the pink one is, I will go and read blogs that point to the most other blogs, right? And that's a bad strategy. Or even worse strategy is to say, oh, I'll just go read random blogs, okay? To look how we scale, here's the picture. Again, number of selected blogs versus the time. Lower is better. If you do exhaustive search, right, it explodes very quickly. If you are doing greedy, it scales quadratically because function evaluations also take linear time. And if you are using this lazy evaluation idea I showed, our time, again, increases linearly, but very, very slowly. So here you can see that we are like 700 times faster than simple greedy approach. Okay? So not maybe surprisingly, the same approach applies to also much more serious problems. So here's the idea is that we have a city water distribution network where contaminated water could be spreading through the network, right? And the question is, where do you put your sensor, your monitoring station, so that if there is an outbreak, you detect it as quickly as possible. And this is something that US Environmental Protection Agency cares a lot about. And again, I can show you similar plot as before. Here is the number of nodes we monitor, the number of sensors we place, versus the population saved, basically versus the reward. And you can see our performance versus other heuristic placements. So for example, one would say, let's put, since we are worrying about saving population, let's put sensors there where there are a lot of people. And you can see that this is this blue one, how much worse it performs. And moreover, there was this competition called Battle of Water Sensor Networks, where our approach, as I just introduced it, was like better from Sandia and basically all these other people who are really water management people and so on. So basically this lightweight approach.
Where did the data come from?
Here the idea was that we had like a realistic simulator of how water flows. So the data came from civil engineers. So we had like real city water distribution network, and we had like a simulator from civil engineers that simulated how the disease would spread. And it was quite realistic actually. They like simulated how population changes, like water would flow one way during one part of the day and the other way during the other part of the day and so on. So, but yeah, it was simulated, okay? Okay, so now I'm sort of over more than half of the talk. I showed you about the diffusion, and now I want to show you about network evolution. And to give a bit of the background, here is how this whole story usually goes, right? So basically, the idea is that we take some data and we make some empirical finding on real graphs that then lead to new network models. So what I mean by that is, for example, probably the most famous example is the power law or heavy tail degree distributions, right? The idea is if you plot log degree, basically log of the number of links a node has versus log probability of seeing such a node, this follows a straight line, follows a power law. So the question is then, what kind of model, what kind of mechanism describes this well? So the idea is when a new node comes and wants to create its edges, how should it attach these edges so that this type of global pattern would emerge, right? And then we say that this model, like preferential attachment, explains this property. And of course, once you have a model, this also implies other network properties, right? Basically makes assumptions or implies other network properties. And what I'll talk about here is basically how do networks evolve over time? How does this network structure change as new nodes are being added? And we look at two aspects of it. First one is a simple question that says, what's the relation between the number of nodes and the number of edges in the network, okay, over time? And prior work made this assumption that the average degree is constant over time. And that doesn't seem to be true. So if you go and measure this in real data, so for example, here I have internet, autonomous systems, and physics citation networks for like, this is like 2 years worth of data. Each day there was a measurement. This is, I think, like 16 years worth of data from like 1990 to 2006. And what I'm plotting here is the number of nodes at particular time versus the number of edges at particular time. And what you can see from these are two things. First is that networks are becoming denser over time. And what I mean is that average degree is increasing. And the other thing is that they're not just, this is just not happening just in some arbitrary way, but this densification power law relationship holds, right? We have number of edges at particular time is number of nodes raised to some power, right? And this alpha densification exponent will be between 1 and 2. If it's 1, then we are in the regime that people assumed so far, right? That average degree remains constant over time. If we are in 2, we are effectively building a clique, right? Everyone knows a constant fraction of the other nodes in the network. If you look at the data, this densification exponent is like non-trivial. For the internet, it's 1.2. For citations, it's 1.6, which basically effectively means that our citation lists in our papers are getting longer and longer. And we spend less time on the content of the papers as a result. Okay, the other such thing is about distances or diameters in networks. So here prior work and intuition say that diameter slowly grows. And what I mean by that is if you take a small graph and you say what is the longest, shortest path, right? Let's say this red path, then this is small. If I take a bigger network, then this path gets longer, right? And it increases slowly with this n, the size of the graph, right? Like logarithmically or sublogarithmically, but it increases. And as you might have expected, that's not entirely true. And if you go and do this measurement for the graphs I showed on the previous slide, so basically this is the autonomous systems internet, this is the citation graph from arXiv. You can see how the distances shrink as the network gets larger over time. So here is over time, this is with the size of the graph. And you can see how the diameter basically shrinks with the size of the network. So these are two observations. And now it's a sort of usual game, right? You go, you check the current work, current models, and none of them explains or gives you networks that have such properties. So then you go, you say, okay, I need a new model. And here is the idea how to develop a new model. So what we will be exploiting is the idea to generate graphs recursively. And why is this a good idea? Because recursion, self-similarity, fractal-like structures usually come together with like skewed or power law-like distributions. And skewed distributions are usually found in large networks. So that's the idea. There are many ways how you can generate how you can get your recursion to start working. And one way to do it is through these Kronecker graphs. And it turns out that this is the right way to do it. So what I'm showing here is some initiator. So we'll start with a small graph and then we'll be recursively expanding it. So what I mean by that is that here's the adjacency matrix for this particular graph. And we'll be expanding it in the following way, right? We'll take G1, put it in every cell of itself, and multiply with a constant in front of it, right? So I'm getting these copies of G1, and here I'm getting a block of zeros, right? Because I'm multiplying this matrix, every element of it by 0, so I get a block of zeros, right? And you can see now how I can continue doing this on. And this is, for example, what would happen next. I get this nice self-similar adjacency matrix, right? I get these big blocks of zeros of no edges, and then every dot here represents an edge. And you can see how this resembles the original thing. Okay. As I said, as it turns out, this is exactly the Kronecker product of graph adjacency matrices. And what also turns out is that there is a way how to explain this that it sounds natural, that it's not just a mathematical construction, but actually there is a nice social interpretation why this could be realistic. Okay? And since I showed you that this is like a deterministic, you can also make it randomized. And the way you do it is instead of having zeros and ones here, now you put probabilities here, everything still works, and so instead of having 0 ones here, now we have probabilities. And this will be important for the next slide. So what turns out is that if this is the...
So what is the social interpretation?
The idea is that you have, that this encodes the linking probability, and every node has a set of attributes. So the idea is that every node is described by the set of attributes, and then you say, what's the probability of two nodes linking? You look the attributes of one, and look the attribute of another, and multiply these probabilities together. So you can sort of say how similar they are. It will tell me how likely they are to link. Yeah?
You're not assuming that the graphs that you're doing the Kronecker product are all the same, are you?
Right now I am, actually. I can easily relax this assumption, but basically for the next slide, I'll assume that it's just this thing multiplied with itself a bunch of times. But you can easily use different matrices to multiply them. Okay? So before I go and show you why, basically what you can do is, if you assume that this is your generative process for graphs, then you can prove that graphs generated this way will have many properties that real graphs have. So namely, you can prove that you'll get power law or heavy tail degree distributions, you will get densification, you will get shrinking diameter, and you'll get spectral properties that are similar to the ones found in the real networks. So that's good news. What I want to do now with this model is the following, right? I want to generate realistic synthetic graphs. What I mean by that is that you give me a real graph and say, please generate me a synthetic graph here, so that if I go and measure some property, measure some statistics of these two graphs, the statistics matches. Okay, that's the idea. You can say, why would you want to do this? And there are several reasons. So for example, if you'd want to do simulations of your new routing protocol, you want to have a realistic synthetic network. If you want to do some kind of predictions, how things will look, how the graph of internet will be 5 years from now, you want to have a model that will be able to do that. You always need a good null model for like hypothesis testing, things like that. The other thing would be if you have a network that's privacy sensitive, but you'd still like to share it. So maybe one way would be to generate a synthetic network that resembles this one and share that one. Okay? But when you go, there's always this question, which network properties do I care about, right? Maybe I care about more path lengths than the degree distribution and things like that. But actually, our answer here is let's not commit. And what we'll do is we'll just try to match the adjacency matrices directly. So what I mean is the following. So I'll be doing maximum likelihood type of estimation, and here is how we will go about the whole thing. So the idea is to find this little initiator graph that then I'm expanding to get the big graph, right? So let my initiator be called theta, and let's assume it's 2 by 2 for now. So the idea is that I'll take this little 2 by 2 matrix, I'll use Kronecker multiplication to expand it. Okay, now I have this big adjacency matrix. Then here's the real adjacency matrix, and what I'd like to evaluate is this probability, right? Given my how likely are my parameters to give rise to this adjacency matrix, right? So here, every cell now is a probability of seeing an edge, so its likelihood is very naturally defined, right? I have to go do this sequence of coin flips to get such a pattern. And if you go and try to evaluate this probability naively, it's very expensive. It's like order n factorial n squared. And it's also easy to see why it is that way. So the order n factorial comes for the node labelings, basically the graph isomorphism testing, if you want. Because the idea is that if this is the real adjacency matrix, I can permute it, and the hope would be that if I permute it long enough, it will start looking exactly like this, right? So when you want to estimate this, you have to sum over all possible permutations. You can't really do that. So what you can do is you can use metropolis sampling basically to get from n factorial to constant time. Okay, that's the first thing. And even then, if you say somebody will tell me what's the correct node labeling, you still have to go through these adjacency matrices cell by cell and compare whether you got the edge right or not, right? And this will cost you n squared time, which for the size of our problems is, again, too large, right? We can't even compute this matrix because it's too big. So the idea here is to use sparsity of real graphs and properties of Kronecker product to get from this n squared time to order e time. So, and then once we are able to estimate this probability, we can do gradient descent over our parameters. Basically, we do stochastic gradient descent to recover this parameter matrix. Okay? So basically, what's the good news here is that we can estimate this little 2 by 2 or 3 by 3 or k by k in linear time, in the time proportional to the number of edges in the graph. And to show you some results, here I have for the opinions network that was actually collected by Pedro and Matt, that has like 76,000 nodes and a bit more than 500,000 edges. If you say what's the space of all permutations, it's like 10 to 1,000,000. But we can search this, or at least small part of it, in 2 hours. This is the parameters we obtain here, this theta hat. And if you now go and generate a synthetic graph using these parameters and compare it to the real graph, here is, for example, degree distribution. Real is red, green is what we get. You can plot the cumulative distribution of path lengths. Again, we match quite well. You can plot the distribution of the first eigenvector, and again, we are quite close. Right? So basically, what is nice and surprising here is that with 4 numbers, I can describe this beast of 75,000 nodes and 500,000 edges quite precisely. Okay? So now I showed you. Now I'm done with the second part. I showed you about densification and shrinking diameters, and then this motivated us to develop this new Kronecker graphs model, and then I showed you how to fit it to the data to be able to generate realistic synthetic networks. So because you see I shrank this, here are 2 more things that are coming. So I'll quickly show you 2 other little applications that are sort of cute, and then I'll conclude with some future work. Okay? So these are the 2 things I want to show for the rest. So I want to show you something about how to predict the quality of web search results without even looking at the page content. And then very briefly, how does the social network of the whole world look like? So here's the idea, or here is what you can think of. So basically the scenario. User comes to a search engine, types in a query, right? And search engine returns a set of search results, okay? And then if you look how the search results are connected. So the idea is that red squares are the search results the search engine returned, edges are just hyperlinks, and then the circles are some other web pages there on the web that make the whole graph connected, okay? And now I show you such a graph and ask, is this a good set of search results? Which means if I now go show you the query and this particular web page, the user will say, yes, that's related, that's relevant, okay? That's the idea. To test your intuition, here I have 2 examples, right? One is good and one is bad. So basically, one is a good set of search results and one is like a bad set of search results. Any guesses? Which one is good? This one. Okay, I'll show you. So that's the result, right? So this is good and this is bad. And intuitively, actually, we do learning over this, but you can go and ask what kind of features come out as important. And it turns out that poor results are search engine throws you down on this web graph randomly, right? Results are not really connected, so you are not happy. You are much happier when part of your results is nicely connected, but then you also get some diversity. So that's the intuitive explanation. And actually the other thing where this intuition works really well is if you ask, will user go and change the query, right? Given that my results are connected in this way, you can ask, will user reformulate the query? And it turns out, if this is what the user gets, then they will specialize the query, right? They will sort of narrow down their search results. It turns out that if you return something that's already connected and has no these circular nodes in it, user will go and make their query broader. So to show some results, what we did here is we had 30,000 queries with top 20 search results for each one, and for each of these query search result pairs, there was like a human judgment on a 6-point scale from perfect to bad, right? And the predictive task was predict the highest rating in this set of results, okay? And basically what it turns out is that we can do this prediction with 82% accuracy. So basically with 82% accuracy, we can say whether this set of results is good or bad, or whether this query is hard or easy, or yeah, things like that, okay? And now the other thing is about the Microsoft Instant Messenger social network. So here you are probably familiar with this small world experiment from Milgram, right? Where people in Nebraska were said to send letters to people in Boston through their friends, right? And the question then was, how many steps does this take? Okay, and what I mean by this is that, here's Nebraska, there's Boston, and this is how the letter traveled, right? And then there was another letter that traveled this way, and the question is, what is the distribution of these path lengths, right? And this is the graph from original Milgram's paper back there in the 60s. He had like 64 of these letters reaching the goal. He plotted this histogram and concluded that average is 6.2, so this is why we have 6 degrees of separation, okay? Now you can go do the same thing on a like 4 million times larger scale, right? You can take this social network of Messenger, which is basically the whole world. You have 240 million people and 30 billion conversations, and you can do the same thing, right? So now I'm plotting same thing. I'm plotting the distance versus the number of paths. Since I have a few more, I'm plotting in on a log scale. But actually what you can see is very similar shape. Okay, we get people that are very far apart. So there are people in the network that are like 30 hops apart, but average is 6.6. So basically we get like half a step longer than what Milgram got in the 60s. So here are basically few challenges, right? One is how do you work with networks of such size, just like engineering-wise, or how do you approach such big graphs? The other question that I think is very interesting and I sort of want to work next on is how do you learn these shortest paths, right? In Milgram's case, people were asked, please forward this letter. So they had no global knowledge of the network. So how do you route to find your target person? How do you route your message to your friend so that eventually the message reaches the target person? And since in this network, we know like people ages, locations, their behaviors, the question is, can you learn what's the decision function, who to forward it on? Okay? So to quickly summarize and continue, I showed you about diffusion and cascading behavior, showed you about network evolution. There we talked about basically patterns and observations, basically measuring the data, and then I showed you about models and algorithms, how to decide who are influential nodes, how to detect epidemics, and how to generate realistic graphs. And I hope I conveyed that like big data really makes a difference when you want to do things. Now I want to tell you quickly basically 3 different things that I want to do next. So first is about the diffusion in networks. So this is like a prototypical image of how things would go, right? The idea is that there is some obscure technological story that slowly propagates from less important blogs to more important blogs to like mass media. So the question here is how do news and information spread and propagate? So what does it mean to be influential? How does this manifest in the network structure? The other thing is also like you can think of it as sentiment analysis from the network structure. So what I have here actually turns out that different topics propagate in different ways. So for example, this graph is like a typical propagation for politics, right? While this is for technology, right? When Slashdot says something, a lot of people jump up, but nobody cares about it anymore. While in politics, right, people tend to not agree, and then you get these complicated connections between the posts. And basically what I'm doing here right now is I'm crawling like 2 million blog posts a day to get enough data so that these types of patterns become emerging. Okay? Another natural question here is how to build predictive model of information diffusion, right? So the question that I'd like to answer is basically when, where, and what post will create a cascade, right? And then once you have such a predictive model, then you can ask, where should I put my advertisement, my information, so that the most people know about it? So this is useful for social media marketing, which would mean I'm an advertiser, I want my product to succeed, where should I place my ads? Or you can ask, it can be used for emergency response type things, right? You say, I want the most people to know that something is going on. Where do I put my information? And the other thing that then comes naturally here is that so far I was only talking to you about the topology, basically the graph structure, but then very quickly you get attributes on nodes and edges. And the question is, how does topology and attributes, how do they interact? On the network evolution side, one question is, why are networks the way they are? Basically, I would like to continue doing sort of fundamental work on why do we see networks the way they manifest to us, build models and understanding of what kind of processes are going on. And here we have some work on network community structure that is sort of different from what we have been thinking so far. The other question that's interesting is notion of the health of a social network. So the question here is how to better design and steer networks. So here I'm working with Facebook, where they want to make sure that their social network is healthy, whatever precisely that means, right? And they don't want it to be taken over by a particular subgroup or things like that. So the question here is, how do you grow, steer your network nicely? And another very interesting thing, I think, is predictive modeling of large communities, where the idea would be, since we have this like large online multiplayer games or virtual worlds, we also have like detailed traces of human activity. So basically we have this closed world where we know for every person what they have been doing. So a very natural question here is, can you predict the future, right? Can you predict which alliance will win the war, who will win the battle, what will happen when they have elections for the galactic president and things like that, right? And here I'm working with this company called EVE Online. They have like a single space trading game on a single server of like 250,000 people playing at the same time, and they have elections in June. And the thing is, can we spot, trends in the society and try to predict who will win the election? So this is sort of on the network content side. And then one very natural future work direction is also how to scale up, right? I showed you this research on big data, and what we are looking right now at is basically MapReduce for massive graphs. So the idea is what kind of algorithms and techniques you can use on graphs that you don't have to necessarily load into the memory. And here we are working with Yahoo Research that gave us access to like a 4,000 node Hadoop cluster. Hadoop is just open source implementation of MapReduce. Supposedly this thing is like 50th fastest supercomputer in the world. And here we already have some results that basically allow us, or some algorithms that allow us to peek into the structure of the graph without really loading the graph into the memory or anything like that. Okay, so to quickly conclude, I think that's how I see the whole picture, right? Networks are here, and are inside computer science are very nice intersection of like data mining, machine learning part, computer systems as like large data, and theory in terms of what are good models and what can we prove about them. And even more, there are all these like nice other areas like statistics, computational biology, physics as complex systems, social sciences, social networks that all intersect here. Yeah?
So in the MSN Messenger example, at the end you asked about the routing question, and there are nice theoretical results, and clearly this would be something that people would have used in Milgram's experiment was geography. Do you have any geographic connection on those MSN Messenger?
Sure, yeah.
And are those algorithms, those geographic-based routing algorithms, plausible routing algorithms in those models?
So yes, we know. So the question is about the geography. Yes, we know about every person, what language they speak, which country they're coming from, and what's their IP address. So from the IP address, you can like really pinpoint them down. The other thing is about geographic routing. Actually, it turns out that like 1 mile in Manhattan is much more than 1 mile in Nebraska, right? So and actually there is theoretical work that says, it's not geographical distance, but it's basically how many people are inside the particular ball. That is your distance measure, right? In Manhattan, 1 mile is 1 block. In Nebraska, 10 miles is 1 mile or something. But yeah, the idea is also, sure, geography will play an important role, but the question is also how much does age depend, what does gender say, how much does your activity on the messenger, basically what are your attributes versus the network structure, how do these all depend? Okay? Uh-huh.
On the cascade shapes that you showed us on the slide there, you did analysis of the different graph shapes involved with various linkage patterns on the blocks. Did you find that almost all the depths on the links were only like 2 or 3 nodes deep?
The thing is, usually, yeah. I mean, the cascade shape the cascade size decreases power law and very quickly. So sure, most of the cascades are like trivial, right? Somebody says something and nothing happens, propagates maybe 1-2 links. However, there are also ones that are huge and that really went on. So most of the ones are very uninteresting ones, and I sort of showed you the most frequent ones, the simple ones, but it can get also very deep. And yeah, as I said, 95% of the times nothing really happens. But when it does, it gets big. Any more? Yeah.
So in the financial markets prediction community, algorithms that predict financial markets have only a short amount of time at which they're accurate, in which case afterwards they intervene and make the algorithms themselves not applicable. So what's your feeling towards what happens here when you start intervening in the social networks? And maybe what are the sort of longevity issues of the social network prediction algorithms?
So it's a good point. The thing is, there will be a feedback sort of effect, but I don't think it will be so dramatic as it is in marketing, because right there you are like competing against everyone else. Here, if you are Facebook, you can run your experiment and see, or you can try to redesign things, right? So maybe we'll be better off. But there, you are right when you say there will be like feedback effects.
Some of the Google search engine optimizations have a very similar back and forth play between people optimizing the algorithm and then the counterparts that they'll optimize the sites to feed back and try to optimize the results in the search engines.
Sure, and similar effects you have when people bid, like for keywords, right? You sort of again get like people chasing each other and so on. Yeah, but I think it will take some time before this gets so important that like billions of people will worry about it and try to play the system. Okay, thanks a lot then.